to The Big Picture. I'm Tina Jha. UK Prime Minister Boris Johnson on Monday announced a new UK-India trade and investment worth £1 billion, including an investment of £240 million by the Serum Institute of India for its vaccine business in Britain. The announcement came just ahead of his virtual summit with Prime Minister Narendra Modi on Tuesday. The package includes over £533 million of new Indian investment into the UK in vital and growing sectors like health and technology. British exports to India worth more than £446 million, while £200 million of these deals will support low carbon growth. Now, the investments include £240 million to be pumped in by the Serum Institute of India for its vaccine business in Britain, and as well as a new sales office it's going to have there. According to the British Prime Minister's office, the investments form part of the enhanced trade partnership. So on The Big Picture today, we will analyze this new £1 billion India-UK trade deal. How is it going to benefit both countries? And is it going to pave way for a future free trade deal is what we will also discuss with our experts. Joining me on the program are two distinguished panelists. Let me first introduce them to you. I'm joined on the program by former Ambassador Jitendranath Mishra and Professor Swarn Singh, Chairperson, Centre for International Politics, Organisation and Disarmament, JNU. Thank you, gentlemen, for joining me on this edition of The Big Picture. Ambassador, let me begin the program with your views on the £1 billion trade deal announced by the British Prime Minister just hours before his summit, virtual summit with Prime Minister Modi. How significant do you think it is going to be for both India and the UK?
Thank you very much once again, Tina ji, for inviting me for your wonderful program. Well, this deal is a limited deal, but has enormous significance because it opens the doors to the larger trade deal, the free trade agreement that the two countries are negotiating. And it's all about politics at the end of the day. When you open the door, you are really making things easier for the rather difficult negotiations that are continuing and will continue leading into the FTA, the Free Trade Agreement. So therefore, this is a very important mark, first of all, as I said, of political intent by both countries. There is a reason why they are doing it now. Of course, there is a virtual summit in a few hours, and they wanted to show some results for the summit. That's, of course, some information in the public domain that goes out that is good and positive in very difficult times. But it's more than that. The political intent has a lot to do with China. In my personal view, China is there from the Indian perspective. You know, the summer has started. You know what happened on the 5th of May last year in Ladakh. And God forbid, with our difficulties at this time, which are exponentially greater than last year at this time, in a crisis situation, there is going to be, and I hope there isn't, but there is possibly going to be Chinese pressure, more Chinese pressure in the summer. So we want to tell the rest of the world that we are not alone. We have partners. And when we talk of a supply chains resilient initiative that we have had with our partners Australia and Japan, and of course the Quad initiative on the vaccines, if we want to seriously take supply chains away from China's control into a concert of countries that have common concerns on Chinese practice in trade, then we have to have more partnerships. And therefore, it is very important. It is a mark of intent. The other thing is that we are probably going to sign a free trade agreement, probably, but not sure, with the European Union when we have the virtual summit next week on the 8th, I think. And this is all over the media. So is this a kind of a preemption by Britain, at least, that, okay, we are not in the European Union, and if they're going to do it, we are also going to do something, if not a free trade agreement, because we are not ready for it. So therefore, this is important for both the countries for political reasons. The economic reasons for Britain are compelling. We have seen in the media, and as you yourself mentioned, the figures, they are tantalizing figures. And when Prime Minister Boris Johnson talked about it today, and it's all over the media, the Guardian, the BBC, and Reuters, all the British media, the Independent, I've seen them all, and all of them are talking about this opens the door for British exports to India and
Yes.
Indian investment in Britain. It's not talking about Indian exports to Britain or British investments in India. It's talking about British interests very clearly. So the readout is a British readout. I have not seen anything much in the media. In the Indian media, all the reports are British origin. So I am not seeing any Indian point of view. And God forbid, if I read it carefully, to me it looks like a rather one-sided picture where it's promoting British and not Indian interests. But I'll come to that later. I'll stop at this point.
Okay. Let me bring in Professor Swaran Singh at this point in time into the discussion. Professor, your thoughts on how this new trade deal will add a new dimension to the already strong India-UK trade relationship? And do you think it's going to pave way for a free trade agreement between both countries in the near future?
Thank you, Tina. I agree with Ambassador Mishra. But of course, there are multiple perspectives of how do we look at the trade relationship as far as the free trade area agreement is concerned. They have indicated two dates. One, that the negotiations are likely to begin within this year, as they say later this year, and that agreement is likely to be clinched by 2030. As Ambassador said, these are things which can always have repercussions, and the dates could be postponed later, but as of now, these are the dates. But it is interesting to understand what has transformed the relationship in the last about 5 years. This is in middle of Britain's exit from European Union and the constant and sort of rather complex negotiations. Britain has described itself now as global Britain, which means it is trying to find a certain economic resilience using other trade partners. Because as you remember, about 80% of the British economy is dependent on services. 50% of Britain's exports are services-driven exports, and bulk of them are with European Union. Now, with the reorganization of the new trade deal with European Union, Britain is clearly looking at other potential buyers of its services, and Britain has already signed a free trade agreement with Japan, with now Canada, also with Turkey, and India, of course, is another very interesting destination for them. And that is partly so because bilateral relationship, both in trade and investment, has seen a certain upsurge in about last 4 years or so. And that is primarily driven by the fact that both have to explore what are the advantages they get from each other. To give you some simple examples, India is a huge population and huge market. Indeed, Indian population is bigger than United States and the European Union put together. So look at the potential that Britain then can see of exporting to India in that sense. The reverse is also true. In fact, now there are a lot of experts who talk about reverse colonization. We keep talking about an Indian community in United States, which is there only 1% of United States population. In UK, Indian or people of Indian origin are 2% and equally prosperous people. 1.4 million people are of Indian origin, including the Chancellor of Exchequer now, for example, is a person of Indian origin. And in that sense, about 1,000 plus companies are today present, Indian companies are present in Britain, providing employment up to 100,000 employees are employed by these companies. These investments that you're talking of now, with Infosys, for example, is going to create another 1,000 jobs. Serum Institute of India is going to create another set of jobs. So total about 6,500 jobs. So enormous footprint, and these Indian companies have an annual turnout of about $50 billion every year in Britain. So in that sense, India's investments have really been enormous. In fact, let me say India today is the second largest investor in Britain. Yes. After United States, and countries like Germany and France come after India today. It's a very strong and very rapidly changing relationship with enormous potential. Of course, in any expanding economic relationship, there will be serious questions, there will be structural issues, hiccups. there will be biased view that each side is trying to push their own agenda into this. So, for example, for the first time, Britain is going to export fruits, apples, pears, and quince to India. Very interesting, with certification from Britain. No accreditation required from Indian side. So people will raise some of these issues over a period of time, but the fact is there that it's an expanding relationship driven by necessity on both sides, and indeed much more from the British side, which is looking at new partners now. But I would say equally from the Indian side, India has already underlined 5 important areas where they want to fast forward. But let's have the discussion moving forward before we come to specifics in those areas. Thank you.
Okay. Ambassador, so Professor spoke about how every relationship has some hiccups. If we talk about the free trade agreement, which India is quite keen to have with the UK, what are the roadblocks towards reaching this agreement in the first place, and how do we aim to overcome them?
The Indian interests and the British interests are not coinciding completely. They are not the same in this free trade agreement. Now, what are the British interests? They want greater access to the Indian market. India will be almost 8% of the world's economy, 7.97% of the world's economy in 2030. And as Professor Singh mentioned, that is the time frame for the conclusion of a free trade agreement. Now, they are thinking very strategically about a market. Now, we need access to Britain. 2 things that we are talking about. We are talking about an initiative that allows Indian students, for example, to stay in Britain and work in Britain after they complete their studies. This was a major irritant during Theresa May's time when she was Home Secretary. To some extent, it has been alleviated. They can't work, but now they can work for 2 years. The second thing is the allowing of IT professionals and the skilled workforce of India. Now we are talking of a larger initiative encompassing movement of not just merchandise but also manpower. Now the readout from the British is talking of apples, it's talking of pears. It's not talking of Indian students. There's no mention of Indian students. It's talking of export of medical equipment now, all that, and access to the Indian market, and even whiskey. But there is no talk of our students or our IT manpower. So where is the balance in this? Now, it could be that Mr. Boris Johnson, being a very consummate politician, excellent politician, he's speaking to a domestic audience through the British media. So he's talking about the takeaways. Look, I have achieved this from India for British interests, to promote British interests. There may be something that we don't know about yet because there is no readout yet from the Indian side. And legal services, for example, ma'am. Legal services, India is going to allow legal services. That's a huge game changer because British legal companies can operate in the Indian system and make a lot of money. It's a service sector. But will Indian IT professionals be allowed to go there? And the salary caps have been so high in Theresa May's time. Again, this was a major irritant that it didn't allow a lot of people to go to Britain because the salaries, the caps were very high. It has been lowered to some extent. So these are the issues the 2 sides will need to talk about, like the migration and mobility agreement, as I said, initiative. But there is speculation today in the Daily Telegraph newspaper of Britain that they are almost close to clinching a migration and mobility partnership. I hope they are.
As we speak, I was just looking at the External Affairs Minister's message on Twitter. He's there in the UK and he has met the Home Secretary. He has in fact signed that agreement that you're talking about. But the other barriers that you have spoken about, let me take that question to Professor. So all of these barriers, Professor, which the ambassador has spoken about, both trade and non-trade barriers, from the Indian perspective, if we try and understand, are these not being taken care of in the ETP?
See, at this stage, it's a kind of an interim arrangement that they have sought to arrive. So this particular enhanced trade partnership is a kind of quick fix of certain areas. It's not fundamentally trying to address more complex area issues right now. So I understand flowing of professionals from India, the skilled professionals of India into UK will be a major issue from the Indian side to push forward. In fact, the last big free trade area agreement, the world's biggest free trade area agreement, was regional comprehensive economic partnership of India and ASEAN plus other countries, which India finally did not join at very last minute because, among others, this was one of the issues. Should Indian professionals be allowed to, look for opportunities in those countries? And India has an enormous empowered skill power, manpower here. And that export of India should be allowed, and that bargain will happen. But at this stage, yes, it appears that Britain is pushing its own agenda upon India, and it would like to ensure that several both tariff and non-tariff barriers are removed, several quotas are removed in terms of allowing British exports to come to India. To some of those areas, of course, India has allowed. Similar, for example, India has also sought much more opportunities for export in Britain. So there will be areas where Britain will also be conscious as to which sectors it wants to open up for India's investments and which sectors it may not be interested in opening up and on what terms. So this enhanced trade partnership is an interim measure. This, I think, primarily seeks to create atmospherics for both sides. Britain, as you know, is the fourth largest impacted nation, despite being a small nation of 67 million people of the pandemic. So there is enormous need domestically for Prime Minister Boris Johnson to upswing that mood of people. And that is why, despite the pandemic, he was promising to come and have a visit to India. Of course, with the surge again in India, that visit again has to be postponed, and therefore the virtual meeting is taking
Obviously,
place.
in the wake of Brexit, deeper trade relations with India is something which is on priority for the UK. So, Professor, we've spoken about the barriers with the ETP, but if we talk about the new opportunities that this agreement will unlock for both Indian and British businesses, which are the key sectors where new opportunities are going to be seen?
I think the economic relationship will be the driving force at this stage. But if you remember, Britain not only is today emphasizing itself to be global Britain, it is also emphasizing India as a global India. So if you read their recently, last month issued this kind of foreign policy document, which showed how Britain is going to sort of now have a pivot to Asia Pacific, has gone to the extent of saying no major decisions around the world can be made minus India. So they are also proposing and projecting India as a global player. And in that sense, I think it's also going to be symbolic gains for India, just as also concrete gains for India. But at this stage, India also depends on several sectors, advanced technologies from Britain. For example, the 5 sectors which are being underlined as priority areas by India's commerce ministers are life sciences, information technology, chemicals, services, and food and drinks. So India has also articulated which are the areas where India wants to move much more faster. But it's, urgently they are supplying us oxygen. About 900 plus oxygen cylinders are being flown in from Britain. But it's a larger relationship I want to underline, which is where India wants to come together with Britain in terms of dealing with the pandemic, in terms of healthcare, in terms of climate change, in terms of whole sort of other areas, defense cooperation. So in that sense, the holistic picture looks, which is what is pushing this relationship in a much more stronger and in a bilateral fashion compared to earlier Britain being largely seen as a gateway to European Union. That, of course, is not going to happen now. So thickness of the bilateral relationship has to be underlined here, where I think it's easier always among nations to push forward trade and investment issues, which is where you see profits happening and results happening quicker. Then you move to much intangibles, which is where strategic cooperation, defense cooperation moves in. So I think in that sense, it's unusual at this stage that the need in Britain to engage India is really strong today because of that exit from European Union. And India must make best of that opportunity here. Of course, India will also negotiate as hard as possible in terms of both its trade opportunities and its investments in Britain. But India also has enormous leverages today. As I said, second largest investor, world's fifth largest economy, which till recently was growing, among the fastest in the world. So in that sense, India has its own attractions and also leverages in pushing across its own argument. And it may not be the same case as it happened in case of RCEP, where India had to step back at the last minute. We would perhaps in bilateral context be able to push forward several of our agendas onto what we want to achieve in Britain in terms of building that economic relationship with them, which will also move into several critical technologies as well. I think that will be another interesting area where India will see information technology collaborations happening. Health sector is going to be another enormously important sector in coming time. So that is why you mentioned about 2,400 crores of investment from Indian Serum Institute happening there, collaborating in terms of clinical trials, research and development, even production possibly of the vaccine in Britain, and then to sort of export it to the rest of the world in that sense. So, they're already saying that this so-called about $240 million of investment is going to result, very soon in about $1 billion plus of turnover. So that kind of important juncture in which you can build these synergies and then take them forward and see the results start coming out much faster, but also some of them, particularly the intangible strategic cooperation side, will happen much gradually over a period of time. And since trade is easy to connect and understand and build bridges, that is why I think right now Britain and India are focusing trade relationship as something which they want to underline, but it's part of the larger spectrum of overall relationship that India is building with Britain. And of course, we have a whole history of knowing each other much better. Sort of in that sense, there is no problem of cultural gaps or misunderstandings. The understanding of each other.
What we've been hearing from both sides as well, that the joint trade review, the enhanced trade partnership, also the FTA as and when it happens, these are elements which will further elevate our strong, vibrant, sustainable partnership with India. That's what we've heard from the British Prime Minister's office. And also, if we look at the current context, Ambassador, both countries have supported each other in the fight against the COVID pandemic. What prospects do you see for this partnership to grow further in a post-pandemic world?
Well, there will be some challenges, as we have already spoken about. And I agree with Professor Singh that this trade deal, and indeed even the free trade agreement when it happens, is not just about trade. It's about the totality of the relationship. And ultimately, it's about the strategy and the political and strategic elements of the relationship. And this is where China is casting a long shadow over this, not just for Britain, but for the entire world, for the United States. So it's a partnership between India, the United States, Britain, and the members of the Comprehensive and Progressive Agreement for Trans-Pacific Partnership members, together to counter China through creating sustainable and alternative supply chains. And supply chains in the domain of health is very important, because Chinese APIs, for example, in India's pharmaceutical industry, and of course the US raw materials for our vaccines for COVID. So we are very dependent, not only we, but even the Europeans, even the Chinese are dependent on American raw materials in the health sector. So there is that kind of interdependence. And if we want to reduce our dependence on China, we have to have alternate real-time, real-world partnerships, not just handshake partnerships, not just photo opportunities, but something that's solid and tangible. And that is why Serum Institute has taken a huge step, I would say. Conceptually, it's a huge step, because it's like reverse colonialism, as Professor said, that you are actually putting the money and putting the talent in the other country. And as he said, India is the second largest investor, and Britain cumulatively has invested $28 billion, according to Department of Industrial Policy and Promotion figures, our figures, more than $28 billion since the year 2000. So it's number 6 or number 7, I think, in terms of investment in India. So it's a very substantial relationship. Trade figures are, of course, there is a difference in the trade figures. I was just looking at the trade figures, and I'm not able to understand why there is a difference. The Indian figures are lower, but the British figures are something like 26 billion euros. British pounds at this point of time, which is again very substantial. Though it's not in the same league as China or the United States or the UAE, but it is, 10 or 20 years ago, the trade was much, much smaller. So imagine what might happen if there is a FTA. But as I said earlier, Britain will need to take care of Indian concerns, and the FTA negotiations are going to be not so easy. I'm not sure whether they'll be very difficult. They may have been negotiated to a considerable extent. We don't know about it because a lot of things happen over a longer period of time to make incremental progress. That's what diplomacy is. And agreements are unveiled at the right, opportune political moment. And that moment will come. With what's happening with China, that moment is coming. And this will come rather than sooner. So I'm not very pessimistic about the future of the relationship. But at the same time, I'm realistic. Because if you look at the review, the strategic review that took place, I think on the 16th of March, last month, 2 months ago, 1.5 months ago, what does it say? China is regarded as a country that is a challenge to Britain, and China facing problems, China facing responses. They're talking about those kinds of things, but at the same time, they're talking of engaging China. And China is there not named as the number one threat. It's Russia that's named as the threat. The word threat is used only for Russia. So India has to be very realistic. It's about China, but it's not just about China. Their interests with China are very different from our interests with China. Never mind that they didn't go Xiaomi on 5G. Never mind. Those are small steps they have taken. But their engagement with China is and will remain deep. But they are also uncomfortable with that engagement. They want partnerships, and therefore this is going to happen. So therefore, this is a strategic moment for us to build together a partnership in all areas of mutual concern, China and beyond China.
Certainly. And at the moment, what both countries have committed is to further negotiate on the FTA. And also, they've set an ambitious target of doubling the trade by 2030. And in line with the ETP, the British Prime Minister, we heard yesterday, announced the 1 billion pounds of new trade and investment. So with that, I'll have to call it a wrap on this edition of The Big Picture. Time is running out. Thank you once again to both my guests for joining me on the program and sharing your perspective with us and our viewers. Pleasure having you on the show. Take care of yourselves and your families. To my viewers as well, I want to make an appeal. Stay safe, stay at home if you can. If you have to step out, make sure you are masked up, maintain physical distancing, and keep washing your hands regularly. These are basic precautions which will help us stay away from the infection and also protect our families. So stay safe, stay home, and thank you very much for your time.